Now, tomorrow is the 20th anniversary of the 9/11 Twin Tower attacks in New York. On the 11th of September 2001, the world watched as two passenger jets slammed into the iconic World Trade Center. Another plane was also hijacked and hit the Pentagon, and a fourth crashed in Pennsylvania when passengers took on the hijackers. Nearly 3,000 people died. America swore vengeance after identifying that Osama bin Laden's terrorist organization Al-Qaeda had been given refuge by the Taliban before the attacks. That triggered the war in Afghanistan. I'm joined now by our New York correspondent, Will Denselow. Will, good evening. It is astonishing that 20 years on, DNA identification of victims from the World Trade Center continues. Just this week, 2 more people positively linked by their DNA. Tell us more about that.
Absolutely, and it's remarkable. As you rightly mentioned, nearly 3,000 people died on that day, 2,753 of those dying in New York City alone. And according to the medical examiner's office, still around 40% of those that lost their lives in Lower Manhattan that day have not been positively identified. And as you state, for the first time in over 2 years, 2 people have now been positively identified thanks to improvements when it comes to DNA testing. So quite remarkable that people can still be provided with a degree of closure, considering that these advances are progressing and people can at least get that validation that in fact their loved ones' remains have been identified from what happened 2 decades ago in New York City.
Is it still part of New Yorkers' psyche? Tell us a little bit more about, geographically, what has changed. There has been a new building created at the site, but also in terms of the psyche of New Yorkers. Do they still hold it very close to them?
Absolutely. The landscape of New York City changed dramatically, and that effect is still very much in place. The Twin Towers were an iconic building in a city full of iconic towers. And yes, there is now the One World Trade Tower in New York City, the biggest landmark in New York City, skyscraper-wise. There is an enormous memorial fountain in place of one of the towers in place, and there has been a huge transformation of what has happened in Lower Manhattan. Of course, what happened that day not only caused incredible pain when it came to the fatalities, but also had enormous disruptions to economic activity in the bottom tip of Manhattan, many wondering at the time whether businesses would ever be truly welcome back to Lower Manhattan, whether people would want to live down there again. Well, over the past 20 years, we've seen a real transformation. We've seen a number of huge shopping centres built, things like the Oculus shopping centre in the Fulton Station kind of area of Lower Manhattan, being a sign of huge amounts of prosperity and growth that's come in place over the years. But when it comes to the psyche, when it comes to the impact that 9/11 had, well, it very much continues, because the deaths from 9/11 continue to rise as well. 20 years after what happened that day, more people have died since 9/11 due to the toxins inhaled from the fumes as the towers collapsed in those past 20 years, things like cancers and other medical ailments as well. So that loss of life very much continues to this day.
And tomorrow, the 20th anniversary, against the backdrop, of course, of the United States finally pulling out of Afghanistan, which was really quite an awful affair, especially with those attacks on the last days. Talk to me about the official commemorations and what might be different this year.
Absolutely. Well, talking to some survivors from 9/11, they say the 20th anniversary is even more poignant, especially with the US pullout from Afghanistan. What we're expecting on Saturday is US President Joe Biden to visit all 3 sites. He's expected to make trips to New York City, to the Pentagon, as well as to Shanksville, Pennsylvania. That's something we saw 10 years ago when Barack Obama was president. Of course, this comes as recently President Biden was told by a group of survivors, a group of families that had lost loved ones, not to come to any of these sites because they were demanding the declassification of some documents relating to what exactly transpired on 9/11, wanting to see more details as whether there was alleged Saudi Arabian involvement, something, of course, Riyadh vehemently does deny. Since then, President Biden has come out and has ordered an executive order calling for some of those declassified documents to be released. So that certainly is seen as a promising sign for some of those that are calling for yet more answers to still come up even 20 years on.
Thank you so much, Will Denselow, coming to us live from New York City this evening.